Hey friend, welcome back. As you can see, we have quite the task in front of us today. So, what was it? 2 days ago, we started getting a snow warning, and obviously beets can fare pretty well. They can take a light frost, but I had 20 degrees in the forecast incoming. It had rained for 3 days, then was starting to snow, and then was supposed to become 20 degrees. So with all that rain and moisture, I was pretty worried that everything was gonna get a hard freeze. So I went ahead and harvested our beets. And that's the funny part about beets is you can't really see how they're growing, how big they are, because I put them all so close together that the greens become really large. And then all of a sudden, I don't know what I've done until I'm going to harvest them. And we clearly have no lack of beets this year. So one thing that's really nice about beets is you can actually keep them in a blacked out tub. If you put wood chips in there and then just bury the beets in the wood chips, kind of lasagnaing it. So you would do wood chip, beet layer, wood chip, beet layer, and continue to keep that going until you fill the bin. Now it has to be a black bin, can't be see-through. You want no light coming through. And I have kept beets in that environment down in my storage room for 1.5 years, and they were completely fine. So what's great is we don't have to use all of these today, but what I do want to do is get a lot of these pickled up. We as an Sam doesn't love them, but I grew up eating pickled beets. I love pickled beets. It's one of those things that I love on like a salad or especially like a steak salad with goat cheese. I like to just eat them as a snack, to be honest. So they're one of the staples that I like to have on the pantry shelf. So let's go ahead and start getting these pickled. One thing I did want to show you, I think this is it. These are really muddy because I had to pull them in the middle of a rainstorm. This is my largest beet, and let me find something for reference. Okay, this is my beet compared to an egg. It is huge, so I am so excited about that. I think that's the biggest beet I've ever grown. I think I have 2 or 3 that are about this size, so those will be nice because it's less work, less peeling, all of that. But okay, enough of my chit-chatting. I'm clearly excited about my beets. Let's get these pickled. I'm working with an absurd amount of beets, so what I think I'm gonna do is just start filling the sink. That way, as I'm washing, it's kind of like sharing the wealth. So maybe I'll just do like a layer. And I did just scrub the sink last night, so it's nice and clean. Here's another huge one. I tell you, this was quite the successful year in terms of beets. And I'm just gonna fill a stock pot up. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna clean these and then we're gonna boil them. And that will help get our skins off. Here's another huge one. So I just need to do enough to fill our stock pot. Let's start with that. That looks about good. And then I'm just going to get these nice and clean. And we want 2 inches of stem remaining. So if you have more than that, you can take that off, and we're gonna keep this on. Because we're gonna boil these, we wanna prevent bleeding. Now mine are the candy cane stripes, so I worry less about bleeding because they're basically white, but it's still good to keep in mind. Okay, so that's looking perfect. I'm going to, that dirt? No, that's its skin. Okay, that looks nice and clean, so I'm just gonna start putting them over here. When we fill the stock pot, we wanna put the biggest beets on the bottom because that's where it's gonna be the most heat is gonna be. So I'm just going to wash them all. That way I can see what sizes we're working with, and then we'll start sorting them out into the stock pot. All right, you guys, about halfway through that process, I could hear my dad saying, "Don't wash dirt down the drain," as a kid. Isn't it so funny how you forget these things and then all of a sudden they just come back to you of lessons learned. So it's very chilly out, but we are outside washing the beets instead to keep all the dirt going down the drain. So better late than never, I suppose, right? And then I think I do have like a drain cleaner, so I'll use that. These aren't that dirty, but definitely if you have very dirty vegetables from the garden, wash them outside. Don't put that down the drain. Ooh, my fingers are frigid. It's okay, it's cheaper than a plumber. Last one. Okay, let's dump this water, clean this bad boy out, and then we're good to go. Let's bring these beets inside and turn the water off. All right, so I have my pot here. I have all of my beets that I'm gonna do in this batch wrapped up. Can you believe how huge this is? I don't know if the camera's picking it up, but like, look how much room that takes up in the stock pot. It's gigantic. So we're gonna put the biggest beets at the bottom. And remember, you wanna keep this on the root end and 2 inches of the green end on, and that's going to prevent bleeding. So we're going to boil these for about 20 minutes or until they're tender. And what that is going to do is allow us to slip off the skins. Otherwise we would have to sit here and peel all of these beets. And I don't know about you all, but that's just not really on my list of things to do today. Okay, let's see, we're running out of room real quick here. Okay, I think that's all that's gonna fit in this pot. So now I'm gonna top this off with water and we're gonna get it on the stove. All right, let's get that on. I'm gonna just throw the lid on while this is coming up to temperature. We want this to ultimately boil, but because this is very full, I'm gonna have to keep a close eye on it. And please excuse my draining station over here. I have some home baked pumpkin that I'm trying to make some recipes with, so I need to get some of the moisture out. So this is what I do. I just put it in some cheesecloth, put a bowl underneath it, and let it hang for like a day or so, and it helps get all of the moisture out. Okay, so while that is all boiling, I have some rough looking carrots. These have been in our fridge for far too long. They're still snappy though, and they're totally fine. But I want to get them used, so I guess today is just using up root vegetable day. You can see all of the... We're going to peel these, don't worry. Okay. So what I decided I want to make is a carrot cake. Now, actually carrot cake bars, rather than doing like an actual cake. I want these to be like sliceable bars. So, because without the frosting on them, they're gonna freeze really well and it'll be a nice little treat. Sam's doing a ton of hunting right now, and so we have a lot of snacks on the road that need to happen. And so one I thought that would be a really nice idea is a carrot cake bar. He loves carrot cake, absolutely loves it. So I'm gonna go ahead and make little bars out of it. I've never done this before, but I don't see why it can't happen. So we're gonna give it a try. So I'm just gonna peel these and then we need to shred them. I need about 1.5 cups in total of shredded carrot. And today with our canning recipe for our beets, I've gotten a few requests in the comments to do like a step-by-step how to can things from like the very beginning all the way through. So I'm gonna take you all through and show you the full process a lot slower and just more detailed, so that if any of you have had those questions on how to can, I know it can seem really intimidating and kind of scary at first, so I want to take you along with me and show you the process that I follow to make sure everything is sanitary and just make sure that everything is done correctly. So I'm really excited about that. So we're just going to get this carrot cake made while those beets are boiling, and then we'll move on to getting those canned up. Okay, grabbed another bowl. Let's clear off our workbench. And I'm just gonna shred these. You could use a KitchenAid if you're feeling like being a little bit better, but I'm just feeling like going slow and steady, so I'm just gonna use a hand grater. So this is all I'm gonna do. If you're using a hand grater, make sure you're watching those fingers. This can get a little dangerous. You don't wanna cut yourself. So I'm just gonna shred these up. So this looks like easily a 1.5 cups. To me, that's a pretty large bowl. So what I'm gonna do now is, what I like to do is I just shred the big part of the carrot when I know I have enough. So all I'm gonna do is just make little carrot matchsticks, and that will be another great snack. And then you can store them in a Tupperware with water, or you can, just stealing a little snack now, or you can just put them in a Ziploc bag, whichever you prefer. Arrow also loves carrots, so these zigzag pieces, whatever it's called, I'm gonna just give to him as a little treat. He loves vegetables. It's so funny. We always just like give him lettuce and stuff, and everyone's like, oh, he won't eat that. He loves it. Big vegetable guy. All right, here's our shredded carrots. Here's our carrot matchsticks. I'm gonna grab a little container to put these in. And then if you don't plan on eating them very quickly and you don't want them to turn white, just put a little water in here on top of them, and it will prevent that. Or if you don't care, just keep them in like this. Put a little water on top of them if they do turn white, and it'll get rid of that white stuff. So, and what I mean by that is when carrots dry out, they tend to look a little bit more white. So if your carrots dry out, you can just add water onto them and it will fix that for you. All right, let's get started on this cake. So I have a full stick of butter, softened. And to that, we're gonna add in a 1/2 cup of white sugar. And a 1/2 cup of packed brown sugar. Oops, sorry. Okay, and when you're packing your brown sugar, make sure you're like actually packing it in there. They do make wider mouth containers that will work better for this type of application, especially baking where you like scoop things in, but I don't really want to spend the money on it. So I just use these jars that I already had, and they keep my brown sugar so soft. It works awesome. I never have clumpy or hard brown sugar. Okay, we're gonna mix those together. All right, we're gonna call that good. Next, I need 3 eggs. So there's 1. And if you're new here, I use eggs from our chickens, so I always crack them into a separate bowl just to make sure everything's good. I do have a rooster, and I like to just check on the eggs before I waste, put a bad egg in and waste all of these ingredients. Okay, so there's our 3 eggs, and now I'm gonna add in 1 teaspoon, this is gonna be a very generous teaspoon, of vanilla. Yum. And we're gonna mix that just until it's combined. We don't wanna overmix this. And I think I'm actually gonna scrape down the sides just because our butter and sugar got a little on the sides. Okay, that should be better. So I'm gonna make my recipe gluten-free. You can do whatever you want. If you're going gluten-free, here is my favorite baking mix. I just order this in bulk off of Amazon. To this, I'm gonna add in 1.5 cups of flour. And if you don't want this gluten-free, you're just gonna use regular all-purpose flour. You'll notice in my cooking, I make some things gluten-free and other things I don't. Sometimes My bellies doesn't do awesome with gluten, so I do try to limit it. So when I can make things gluten-free easily, I do, but when I can't, like pasta, I don't. And that just helps me kind of keep it to a minimum. We also have family members that are gluten-free, so that helps too. And I'm not like celiac or anything. It just sometimes hurts my belly. So let's mix this flour in. That's good enough for now. I now need 2 teaspoons of cinnamon, and my teaspoon doesn't fit in, so I'm gonna do 4 half teaspoons. 1, 2, 3, 4. I need a half a teaspoon of nutmeg. Perfect. And then I need 1 teaspoon of 1 teaspoon of each with baking soda, baking powder, and salt. So there's my baking powder. Let's get our baking soda in. And my baking soda is a little clumpy because I buy it in very large quantities at Costco, or I have Sam's Club here, but so I'm just gonna break it up in my hand before putting that in. And then we just need some salt. 1 teaspoon, and this is gonna look a little bit dry because the carrots are really moist, and that's gonna moisten up this. If you want to add in nuts or raisins, you can do that. You'll see I'm gonna leave those out. So let's give this another mix. Okay, that looks good. And you just wanna mix it until it's combined. And we're gonna hand mix in the carrots just to keep everything nice and fluffy. So if it's not totally mixed, that's okay, because we'll finish that off with the carrots. So let me get this out of the way. Let's get that off. Give this a quick mix. The more you mix it, the less fluffy it will be. And we don't want this super dense. Okay, I need 1 cup of carrots. And this is a half cup. Okay. Let's mix that in. I love how vibrant carrots are in a carrot cake. Okay, then I have this 8x8 baking dish. And remember, these are bars. This isn't a cake, so it's gonna be a little bit more dense. This is a different kind of recipe. And then we're just going to get our batter added in. Spread that around. Okay, that looks awesome. Into a 350-degree oven, this is gonna go. And this top oven is small, so things tend to bake quicker, but mine baked for 30 minutes. Okay, so our beets in this pot, I think are, yep, they're nice and fork tender, just like a, mashed potato or something. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take them out one at a time, run them under cold water, and then we're gonna put them in our big bowl. And I did find it interesting. The recipe said to run it under cold water. Don't put it in a bowl of cold water. So I did exactly that, ran it under the cold water, and then stuck it in a bowl. And I'm just gonna keep repeating the process. Run one under cold water, put it in this bowl. So now that I have my beets, and this is just a few of them, I'm just pulling them out as they become ready. What I'm gonna do is, they're still pretty hot. You wanna cut off this root end. That. And then cut off the stem portion. And then we just want to use our fingers. And the peel, ooh, will just literally slip off. These are still very hot, so be careful. Can you imagine how long it would take if you had to literally peel every single beet? It would be brutal. Okay, that looks good. Then I like to just run each one under cool water. And then the recipe says to cut them into quarters. That feels very large to me. And remember, these were those candy cane stripe beets. So I'm gonna cut these into 8ths actually, because these are some, actually I think I'm gonna do 6ths. And remember, we can always cut them down when we take them out of the can, but we don't want them to like turn into mush when we're canning them. Okay, let me grab another bowl. So I'm just gonna put our quote unquote finished product here. And like just some of these are so huge, we're not doing quarters because these will never fit into a jar. So just use your own discretion. And these were those candy cane stripe beets. So that's why they don't look yellow, they don't look gold, they actually are white and pink. Okay, that was so easy. Run this under some cool water, clean it off. There you can kind of see the pink and white. They're my absolute favorite beets. Okay, so I'm gonna keep repeating this process until we have all the beets done. Canning really is kind of slow. It's a little tedious because you want to make sure that the ingredients you're preparing are prepared, first of all, right, according to the recipe. When you're boiling them, make sure you're just doing everything correctly. So that's my first tip for canning things, is you need to make sure you are following the recipe to a T. Let me show you. So I'm using this cookbook today. I'll link it down below, and I am on page 309 for my pickled beets. So just make sure you are following every recipe to a T. I will catch you when our beets are ready to go. Okay, let's check on our bars. I did put a piece of foil over it because it was still really jiggly and wasn't looking done. What I like to do is just poke a thermometer in it. Should be right around 200 to 210 degrees. I'm at 210. It's no longer jiggly. I'm gonna call it. Okay, let me finish peeling these beets and we'll move on. Okay, friends, so the first thing I need to do is get our jars sterilizing. And again, this is if you are brand new to canning. I just want to walk you through kind of the easy steps, especially because pickling, in my opinion, is the easiest form of canning. So first thing we want to do is get our jars. Well, first thing you need to do is make sure everything you're using is very sterile and very clean. We are sterilizing our jars right now, but you just want to start with clean appliances and clean tools. So the first thing that I'm doing is I'm just separating. This is called the lid. This is called the ring. You can never, in canning, you can only use this once. Now you can reuse it if you're using another recipe that doesn't require canning, but if you're canning something, you can only use lids once. Now, I buy lids from 4 jars, so I can reuse my jar and I can reuse my ring. And then when I'm canning again, because I can't use the lid, I just get this box of lids, and then that is what I will use for when I'm reusing jars. So you just want to make sure that if you're reusing jars, they don't have any nicks or cracks, that they're in pristine condition, and that you are using a brand new lid. So all I'm doing here is I'm just separating, sometimes they're under pressure, especially because I live in high elevation, but I'm just separating my jars from my lids. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna sterilize these rings, we're gonna warm up these lids, and we're gonna sterilize our jars. So in order to do that, I'm just using the pot that I'm going to can everything in. And you can see that I have this metal tray underneath, and that is because you never want the jars to be sitting directly on the bottom of the pot. It will be way too hot for them and it can cause them to crack or break. So if you don't have one of these little shelves, what you can do is put a towel down there. Be very, very careful if you do that. Or they also make little rubber star looking things that you can put down there as well. So you can pick and choose whatever's best for you, but just make sure that you never are setting the jars directly on the bottom of a pot because you can break them. So this is how I sterilize my jars. I know some people like to do it in the dishwasher. I personally do not. So I like to do it the old-fashioned way. So I fill up every jar with water, and if you don't, you will learn the hard way that if I were to just put the water in the center here and not fill the jars with water first, all of my jars would float and tip over. So I've learned that the hard way. So I'm just gonna fill all my jars with water, and then once they're full, I'm gonna then fill up this pot with water. And in total, you need the water to be an inch or two above your jars when you're canning. Now, I usually, when I'm sterilizing, put the water about a half an inch above my jars because when I take these jars out to fill them, I do dump this water back in to the pot so that it continues to be used. And just so you can see that tray a little bit more, it looks like this. Mine came with my canner. You can get this pot at Walmart for like 20 bucks, but you're able to use any large pot that's large enough to fit all of your jars and give you a half an inch of headspace. Or sorry, 2 inches of headspace over your jars. Okay, so this is full. I'm gonna move this over to the stove. And then I'm gonna turn my heat on medium high, put the lid on, and we're going to bring these up to heat for about 10 minutes. We don't want to boil them, but we want them to be, you know, right before boiling when it kind of gets a little like air bubbles around the jars. We want it like that. So we're gonna keep this lid on until we reach that point. And then in the meantime, we're gonna get our brine going. Oh, and one other thing that I like to do now, before I forget, is I add vinegar to my water. You don't need to do too much. I do maybe 1/8 of a cup. And that is because if you don't do that, you will get cloudiness and mineral deposits around your jars and on the lids. Now, if that doesn't bother you, you can leave your vinegar out. It doesn't hurt anything. It just makes a prettier end product. Okay, now let's get going on our brine. Okay, so for my recipe, and again, always make sure you're following your recipe, I need 2.5 cups of white vinegar per batch. I'm gonna do 2 batches, and you need to look at your vinegar and make sure it says 5% acidity. You can see right here that mine says diluted with water to 5% acidity. That is critical. Don't ever use anything less than 5% acidity when you're canning. So I need 2.5 cups of white vinegar. Because I'm doubling this, I'm gonna need 5 cups in total. Make sure you're very careful with your measuring. And now we need 1 cup of water per batch, so 2 cups of water. There's 2 cups of water, and you just use regular old tap water. You don't need anything fancy for canning. And then we need 1 cup of sugar per batch, so 2 cups of sugar. Wow, that was almost perfect. And then that's it for this. You can add in pickling spice if you want. I don't like pickling spice, so I'm gonna leave it out. So I'm gonna move this over to the stove now and bring it to a boil. And one thing that's important to mention is you need to always make your brines in a non-reactive or stainless steel pot. If you don't, you risk staining or discoloring. So make sure that you are using stainless steel. Okay, so while that's all coming together, I like to next get my canning station all set up. The vinegar is really, really hard on wood countertops, so you can even see where the acidity kind of eats through it, or at least through the polish. So if you have more delicate countertops, definitely put a towel down. Or if you have really cold countertops, like a granite countertop, again, put a towel down, because you do not want to put that really hot glass on a cold counter. It can risk breaking it. Okay, so this tool is going to be used for lifting your jars. When your jars are really hot, you cannot just reach into boiling water, obviously. So it's kind of like tongs, but it's shaped a little bit differently. And it helps you grab along the top of the jar and pick them up. Mine's a little bit broken. Usually it has a grip here too, but it works just as well. And I will link all of these things down below in my description. Next, you need this. It is called a debubbler. So with this end, what you do is once we fill it, we're gonna run this along the outside to get any big air bubbles out. That ensures that we can get the right headspace, which I will show you all of that. So don't let the terminology freak you out. We're just gonna need one of these, and I will link it down below as well, to make sure that we get the bubbles out of our cans. And then it also has this really nifty side, and I don't know if you can see it, but this is a measurer. So our cans will say 1 inch of headspace or a 1/2 inch of headspace. So the first knob here, let me grab a jar. So if the recipe says 1/2 inch of headspace or 1 inch, let's do 1/4 inch of headspace. You're gonna put it on this first knob, and the liquid should just touch that knob within the jar. 1/2 inch, we're gonna move down a step, and this is labeled on it, 3/4 inch and 1 inch. So this little thing helps us get the right measurements. Another cheat is these are also the measurements. So you have to find kind of right where it's solid, because these are going down. But if you look, 1/4 inch of headspace is right at this top line. So that's 1/4 inch. 1/2 inch of headspace is gonna be right at this second line. And 1 inch of headspace is this bottom line. So you can also use that. I would not start with using these. I would start with using this measurer, but that's another thing you're gonna need. And then finally, I like this because, so what it is it's a magnet, and these lids are metal. So when we're taking it out of the hot water and we're putting it on our jar, everything here is sterile and is very, very clean. So if I pick this up like this and I get my oils all over this, after this was sanitized, my jar is clean, I get oils on this, I risk preventing a seal. So what I like to do is I like to take it out of the water like this, stick it on the jar, put my hand on top and release it. And that helps ensure that I'm not getting any oil or any grime on this gasket to make sure that it actually seals. So this is not necessary. If you don't have one of these, you can carry the lid like this. Make sure no part of your finger is touching and just set it on the lid. Totally fine too. I just find this is kind of fun and, in my opinion, a little more foolproof. So that's what I like to have when I am starting out setting up my station. It gets messy real quick. So I like to leave room here for my jars and here for my hot liquid. So I'm just gonna wait for everything to become ready to go, and then we'll start filling. Okay, a few other things you're gonna need that I don't know why I just forgot is a funnel if you wanna use it. And that's just gonna help us get everything into the jars. And then you wanna get a rag put together with some vinegar on it. And we're gonna use this to wipe the edges. And then I'm also going to use pickling granules. You can get this at like Walmart. All this is calcium chloride, I believe. Yep. And it just helps keep everything a little bit crispier. So if you've ever had like a soggy pickle, it didn't have this in it. This just helps keep it crispy. We're gonna use 1/8 teaspoon in each. If you don't have this, don't worry, leave it out. That's perfect. It went a little far, but that's okay. It's gonna be just fine. So what I like to do is lift this out, use hot pads, but I feel like my hands are like industrial with heat now. I will tell you, be very, very careful. Everything you're working with is hot. So as I mentioned, I like to dump the water back in, and then we're gonna put this on our towel. And we're gonna repeat the process till we have all of our jars ready. And a tip for you is to take your jars out in a star pattern. If you don't, you'll have all the weight on one side, and if you have this basket, it risks flipping. These are all things you just learn through trial and error. How do I know? Because I flipped the basket before. So if you did, don't worry about it. We've all been there. But I'm hopeful that my lessons learned can help some of you avoid making the same mistakes. Another lesson learned is if you get too crazy when you dump this, or you dump it sideways so that it goes up the metal will run up to your arm when you're upside down. So make sure that you're pouring the water out between the metal and not towards the metal of the tongs. Otherwise you'll have boiling water running up your arm. Don't ask me how I know. So here's where you want to reread before you take everything off the heat. This says, ladle beets into jars with a 1/2 inch to the top of the jar with the beets, then ladle hot pickling liquid into jar to cover the beets, leaving a 1/2 inch of headspace. Add 1/8 teaspoon of pickling crisp if using. Remove air bubbles, wipe rim, center your lid, screw down band. Okay, we can do all that. I feel confident. I like to reread before I go in. So first thing we need to do is put our beets in our jars. I'm gonna throw on a glove. I know I say follow the recipe to a T, but the recipe called for us to put the beets in and then into the boiling brine, and then take them back out once it was boiling. And I feel like that is mildly unnecessary. So I'm just going to ladle them in, and then the jars are hot. Oops. We'll cover them with hot brine, so no problem here. So if you want to do pints, I'm doing 1/2 pints, but if you wanted to do pints, we're going to process it for the same amount of time. And your processing time is determined by 1, the recipe, and 2, your altitude. So you can Google it or look up a table, but for every couple thousand feet, you will add an additional amount of time on. So I'm almost at 6,000 feet. Not quite. So for every recipe, I add an additional 10 minutes to the cooking time. So if the recipe says cook for 20 minutes, I'm cooking it for 30. And that's just standard canning practices. It's nothing crazy. But that is important for you to know, is that you need to make sure that if you are living above sea level at all, that you know your altitude and you know how much longer you need to process it. I can show you a table in just a second as well. And for reference, feel free to screenshot this. Here is, the boiling water. So at these altitudes, that's how much you increase your time at. So again, I'm right here almost at 6,000 feet. I'm going to boil for 30 minutes, increase it 10 minutes for altitude. So I'm gonna boil mine for 40 minutes, or process mine for 40 minutes. Okay, so we are at 1/2 inch of headspace in each jar with our beets. And I know a lot of people like to use the funnel and pour. I prefer to, well, let me show you both ways. So when I actually pour out of this, you know how the liquid like runs down? So you can use your funnel to literally dump the pan over and pour, but I know that if I do that, I'm about to make a huge mess. So I'm not even gonna show you. But you can also use the funnel to help you ladle in your brine. So what I like to do, remember we need 1/2 inch of headspace in each of these. What I like to do is get it relatively close, and then I go through and top it off and get it perfect. But this first pass, I'm just getting it close. These are like sunsets in a jar. How pretty are these beets? And when you're filling a jar, you don't want to like pack it in. Like I don't want to push these down. I want them to stay nice and whole. So just think about that when you're filling your jars too. And one thing that's really important with canning is making sure that you're putting your items in the size jar that you will use. So because I'm the only one in our house that likes pickled beets, Sam does not, I'm not gonna do a full pint because by the time I open it, it's gonna be hard for me to get through a full pint before it starts going bad. So I like to just use the right size for my family's needs. If I was a family of 4 and we all liked pickled beets, I would definitely can these up in a full pint, but because it's just me, I'm gonna use a half pint. So that's just another thing that's important to think about. And half pints and full pints can for the same amount of time, so you can use them interchangeably as you see fit. And I am bringing the canner back up to a boil behind me because we're gonna need to get these into that, and I need the water boiling. And this is actually the perfect example. Do you see that giant bubble down there? That's bad. We don't want that. So I'm gonna take this and run it along the edge and get any of those large bubbles out. And then also get my beets all in place. Okay, so that one's looking better. Let's get the headspace right. Perfect, and then when I think it looks good, I go in with my measurer. Yep, and I'm gonna just keep repeating this process on all of the jars. Okay, now we're gonna add in our 1/8 of a teaspoon of crisp. And again, if you don't have this, just go without. It does not matter at all. And I will be honest, I had to take a beet out of one of these because it was too full. And it is phenomenal. If you liked like the canned beets that are just like sweet, there's not a lot of like spice flavor or anything like that going on, you will love these. Okay, here is just that rag that we together put vinegar on it. That's all it is, it's just vinegar. Because this is so sugary and sticky, and we've touched it with our hands, go ahead and run this along the outside of each jar to get that stickiness off and any oils or anything that might also be on the jar. And this is also where you're going to be feeling for nicks or anything like that. If it's not completely smooth around the outside of your jar is not going to seal. You risk it breaking in the canner. So make sure that you're feeling for any nicks. So because this is all hot, what I like to do is just try to drop the lid on, and then I'll come back and tighten it. If you pick it up like this, remember you can pinch it with your fingers, but do not touch that red seal area with your hands. And I promise, once you get comfortable with canning, it's kind of like riding a bike. It's just one of those things that you do. It's not a big deal anymore. You just have to do it. So I highly encourage you, if you're nervous about canning, to start with water bath canning. It's significantly less nerve-wracking. But just know, you've done your research, you've watched other people do it, you've got it. You're not going to explode your house. There's nothing, especially with a water bath canner, there's nothing crazy that's going to go on. If you break a jar or something, okay, you broke a jar. So what? It's a little messy in the canner, but it doesn't matter. No one has to know. It's our little secret. So I just hope that this gives you a little bit more confidence if you're new to canning, that it's really not scary. As long as you're following the instructions to a T, you're gonna be fine. Next thing you want to do is you'll hear fingertip tightness. So you want to get the lid on straight and then tighten it just with your fingertips. So you don't want to just use 2 fingers. I pinch each thing with 2 fingers and just tighten it a little bit. This is going to loosen in the canner, so when you take your jars out and this lid or the ring is loose, don't panic. It's totally fine. So just make sure you're not cranking your jars. If you do that, the oxygen can't escape and you're kind of messing up the whole process. So just make sure you're not really cranking them. You really don't even need to like hold the jar. Okay. And the test I do is if I can't hold it and unspin it with one thumb, it's too tight. Okay, let's make sure we got the lids on all of these guys. Perfect. Now let's get these into the canner. All right, remember, everything is hot, so be careful. You can use your tong right now if you would prefer. And once these are all in, we're gonna can these for 30 minutes. Remember, adjusting for altitude, so I will be 40 minutes. Okay, then we're gonna lower this down carefully and gently and evenly. And see how my jars are covered by more than 2 inches of water? Perfect. We're gonna let this come back up to a boil. As soon as it's back up to a boil, start your timer. All right, friends, so while that is coming together on the canning side, we're gonna wrap up this carrot cake. So I have 1 block, 8 ounces of softened cream cheese, 1 very generous teaspoon of vanilla, and then I need 1 cup of powdered sugar. I feel confident I can just eyeball because we're gonna end up putting in 4 cups, but okay, let's start with that. And you can adjust this depending on how sweet you want it. I'm gonna go mix this. And I don't love things super sweet, so I'm gonna try this. We'll put in a little bit more, but that would be silly of me to put the powdered sugar in while this is running. But I think that's pretty good. Okay, and our carrot cake is fully cooled. So I'm just gonna take this icing and we're gonna smear it over the top. All right, there we have it. Okay, my jars are still processing behind me. I haven't had carrot cake in so long. Oh, it's one of my absolute favorites. As long as there's no raisins and nuts in it, I absolutely love it. This is so perfect. It's like a little reward for all of the canning. So I'm gonna go enjoy this. I still have 12 minutes left on the canner. So I'm gonna eat my little piece of bar bread cake. Depends on how healthy we're trying to be. And then we'll get these jars out of the canner. All right, so our timer just went off. What we're gonna do is cut the heat. And then we're gonna pull the basket out very carefully, keep it even. We're gonna let our jars sit like this for 5 minutes. Then we're gonna take the cans out. We're gonna leave them undisturbed for 24 hours. I like to put mine on top of a towel on top of my tablecloth just to protect my table. But again, put them somewhere where they'll be out of the way because they'll need to sit here for 24 hours. All right, friends, that is it for today. Thank you so much for tagging along with me as we get a lot of our garden produce put to great use. I'm so excited for these canned pickled beets. If you've never tried them, seriously do. If you're new to canning and you have any questions on the instructions that I left you, please feel free to just throw those questions down in the comments and I'll be sure to get back to you. I always try to respond to every comment. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I will catch you on the next one. Bye, friend.